My parents were born in England, my dad in 1902 and my mother in 1907. My dad went to Canada to help with the wheat harvest. I believe there was a program, an incentive that took people from England to Canada. So he worked there for many years and got into mining eventually. He came back to England a couple of times, and I think the first trip he walked through the room, and my mother remembers seeing him. And my dad's sister said, "Oh, there's Frank from Canada." And then he went back to Canada, and then on his next visit, they got to know each other. And then my dad went back to Canada again, and they wrote letters. And eventually, he sent her a present in the mail. And he said, "Go to that bench where we used to sit." I think it was in Liverpool. And get the package and open it. And you'll find a glove in the package. And put the glove on your hand. And then there's a little string around one of the fingers of the glove. And cut that with a pair of scissors. And then take the glove off. And she did that. And there was a beautiful engagement ring on her finger when she removed the glove. So they got engaged, and my dad's idea was that he would earn a lot of money quickly so that he could send for her to come over on the boat to Canada. But every time he'd get close, he tried to speed things up by getting in a card game, and he would lose a lot of the money. And so that delayed the prospects. I think it took 5 years finally before he was able to send for her. And so she took a boat to Montreal, Canada, and they got married. And they lived in different shacks, I guess, or log cabins and things. And when I was born, we lived near a little town called Larder Lake. And there was a lake there. But I didn't see Larder Lake very much. We lived a few miles away in the bush in a log house. But when my mother was in England, she liked to go on walks through the countryside. So she tried doing that in the bush in Ontario. And she was always afraid she was going to get lost. And then one day, lo and behold, she got lost. There was a dog with her, but the dog left her at some point, which seems a bit unusual. So there was a search party called out, and we were looking for her. It was, nothing but trees. So she got mixed up and didn't know which direction to go in. And I remember they had this loud siren that was wailing. And I got in a car. I guess I was 4 or 5. Got in a car with my dad and some other men, and we were driving, to different areas, trying to see if we could locate her. And one of the men said, "Maybe a bear got her." And I said, "A bear? Oh boy!" I didn't know anything about bears, and I didn't know what that would have meant for my poor mother. But fortunately, she came out on a road somewhere and was discovered, and her whole face was bitten with black flies, so her face was all swollen up and everything. She got in the local paper, but that was a big adventure for me when I was a kid. And then we moved out of the bush to a town. I mentioned this earlier, and it was so exciting for me. I didn't want to miss a second of it. I never traveled anywhere before, really, in a car. And so I decided I was going to stand up all the way so I wouldn't miss seeing anything. I was too short to see out the window otherwise, being 5 years old. So I stood up the whole way, and both the driver, I guess a friend of the family who drove us, and my mother were rather upset with me, but I refused to sit down. And at one point the car gave a lurch and I fell onto my mother, and she said her nose was never the same after that. And she was really quite unhappy with me, but I was determined to stand up all the way and not miss a thing. It really was quite an interesting adventure. I guess it was a number of hours. I'm not sure how many, quite a few hours of travel. So then we got to Blind River and had a regular house there. It was quite something. And at some point, I started going to school. And I had a friend that I met there, I guess, and the parents arranged that we would walk to school together. I don't know if it was half a mile or something, kind of a long walk. So every morning he would come to my place and we would walk to school, to the first grade together. But one morning he came and I wasn't ready. So he had to leave by himself. So he went to school and then I followed some time later. But I was really scared being alone. It was easy with someone else, but it looked like there was a man that was throwing a rock at me, and he was sitting beside the road. And I finally got to the school, and when I got there, the bell was ringing, and the doors were all closed, and everybody was inside. And I was so scared that I ran all the way home. And they told me I should have just gone in, but I didn't really know how to do it by myself. But I would sit in school. I remember there was a boy named Henry, and he would always sit with his hands folded in front of him. So I copied him for a while, but none of the other kids were doing that, so I didn't do it for very long. And then we started learning to read. Now, when I'd been in the bush, I thought maybe I knew how to read already. I could write my name. I would make 3 lines. Kenny Allen Drummond. And I told my brothers that I was writing my name. They showed me a different way, but it didn't make any sense. So I persisted in my method of writing. It turned out nobody else wrote the way that I did, so it wasn't very useful. But in first grade, we had a book called Dick and Jane, or something like that. And the first word was Dick, and then another word was and I had a little friend next door named Anne, and I thought, oh boy, I know how to write Anne, but it was a different A-N-D is a different word, so I found out fairly soon that I didn't know her name. But I started to read, and there were pictures that made it easy, and after a while I got to the end of the book, and I went to the next book, and I just devoured every book that I found. And just read and read and read and learned a lot. I guess I got ahead of everyone. But there was one word that fooled me. There was a story about a little girl, and I assumed that she was playing outside in the sand and making mud pies. And I thought, well, I've done that a little bit. That's something I like doing. So I assumed that she was making mud pies, and she was making witches out of sand, is what I thought. She was making sandwiches, and I thought, well, that's nice. But then she started to eat them, and I thought, well, I don't know that I'd want to do that. She was eating these sandwiches, and it took me some time later to realize that sandwiches were what she was making, the kind that you eat, with bread, and it wasn't witches made out of sand after all. And so there were a few little obstacles that I had in learning to read, but I persisted, and all these big words that you don't know at first, and then you learn them. I'm sure everybody goes through this. I'll stop this segment for now.